"Stand up, thief," the prosecutor's voice cracked like a whip. An old woman, her jacket threadbare, struggled to rise, her disabled leg trembling. Her faded army medic insignia was barely visible. Scornful whispers filled the courtroom. But a sharp, young lawyer was about to change everything. Welcome to Unbreakable Spirit, where tales of resilience and unexpected justice unfold. Let's delve into the heart of this gripping courtroom drama. The air in courtroom 3B was thick with a mixture of stale coffee and palpable disdain, a place where judgments were often passed long before a gavel fell. Martha Evans, 68 years old, stood silently, her worn face a mask of weary resignation. Her old service-related leg injury throbbed, making even the simple act of standing an agonizing effort. She clutched the worn wooden rail of the defendant's box, her knuckles white. Murmurs rippled through the public gallery. "That's her, the old woman who broke into the pharmacy," one voice hissed, loud enough to be heard. "Lock her up and throw away the key," another added, a sneer evidentia in their tone. Martha didn't flinch. She'd faced worse than whispers and hostile stares in her life, much worse. But the casual cruelty of it, the swift condemnation, still stung. She focused on a crack in the courtroom wall, a small point of reference in a sea of accusing eyes. She knew how this looked. She knew what they thought of her. Then, a sharp click-clack of heels on the linoleum floor cut through the oppressive atmosphere. Heads turned. Claire Anderson, a young woman in her late 20s, strode into the courtroom. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe but professional bun, her gaze direct and unyielding, a stark contrast to the crumbling, apathetic environment. She carried a worn leather briefcase, her movements efficient and purposeful. She didn't fit the profile of a public defender in this overworked, underfunded district. There was a fire in her eyes, a steely resolve that seemed out of place beside the already condemned Martha Evans. Claire walked directly to the defense table, placing her briefcase down with a decisive thud. She gave Martha a brief, reassuring nod, a small gesture that nonetheless seemed to momentarily lift a fraction of the weight from the old woman's shoulders. The prosecutor, a portly man named Henderson with a perpetually cynical expression, rolled his eyes with theatrical disdain. "Another bleeding heart, fresh out of law school, ready to save the world," he muttered to his junior colleague, loud enough for Claire to hear. Claire ignored him. She addressed the aging, weary-looking Judge Harrison. "Permission to approach and make my opening statement, Your Honor." Her voice was clear, cold, and carried an unexpected authority. The judge, who had been absently shuffling papers, looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Judge Harrison grunted an affirmative. Claire Anderson nodded curtly and turned to face the jury box, her gaze sweeping over the 12 faces, a mixture of boredom, mild curiosity, and preconceived judgment. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice resonating with a quiet intensity that immediately captured their attention. "You've heard the prosecution label my client, Martha Evans, a thief. You've heard she broke into a pharmacy." She paused, letting the accusation hang in the air. "But have you heard why? Do you know the woman who stands before you today, accused and shamed?" Claire took a step closer to the jury box. "Martha Evans is 68 years old. She is not a career criminal. She is a decorated veteran of the United States Army, a former combat medic who served with distinction during Operation Iraqi Freedom." A few jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The label, thief, suddenly seemed ill-fitting. During a brutal firefight outside Fallujah, Claire continued, her voice painting a vivid picture, Sergeant Evans, as she was then, crawled under a hail of bullets to render aid to 3 critically wounded soldiers. She saved their lives that day. But in doing so, she sustained a severe injury to her leg from shrapnel, an injury that ended her military career and left her with a permanent, painful disability. Martha unconsciously rubbed her aching thigh. She returned home not to parades, but to a quiet struggle. Her husband had passed away years earlier from a sudden illness while she was deployed. She dedicated her life to caring for her younger sister, Susan, her only remaining family, battling chronic pain and navigating a system that too often forgets its heroes once the fighting stops. She worked a series of low-paying jobs, a cleaner, a late-night diner waitress, anything to make ends meet, until her body simply couldn't take it anymore. The courtroom was quieter now, the earlier scorn replaced by a reluctant attentiveness. 3 months ago, Claire's voice softened, laced with a profound sadness. Martha's sister, Susan, who suffers from a severe, brittle form of type 1 diabetes, experienced a life-threatening medical crisis. Her usual insulin was no longer effective. She needed a newer, far more expensive specialist insulin to stabilize her condition and, frankly, to survive. Claire's eyes locked with each juror. They couldn't afford it. Martha's meager disability pension and Susan's even smaller assistance check barely covered rent and utilities, let alone outrageously priced medication. Their insurance company, after a lengthy and heart-wrenching appeals process, denied coverage for the specialist insulin. Twice. The word "twice" hung in the air, a testament to bureaucratic indifference. Imagine Martha's desperation, Claire urged. Watching her only sister, her beloved Susan, fading before her eyes. Knowing that the medicine that could save her was just a few miles away, locked behind a pharmacy door, but financially worlds beyond her reach. So, this thief, this decorated combat medic, dragged her pain-racked body several miles in the dead of night to the only 24-hour pharmacy in their district. She found a loose rock. She broke a small pane of glass. She took 2 vials of the specific insulin her sister desperately needed. And the very next morning, as soon as Susan's condition had stabilized, Martha Evans walked into the nearest police station and turned herself in. A heavy silence filled the courtroom. Claire reached into her briefcase and retrieved a photograph. She held it up for the jury to see. It was a slightly blurry, candid shot of 2 women, clearly taken some years ago. Martha, younger, in her army uniform, smiling, her arm around a frail-looking but beaming Susan, who was holding a small, hand-knitted doll. "This," Claire said, her voice thick with emotion, "is Susan. This is who Martha Evans stole for." A female juror in the front row dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Judge Harrison, who had been listening intently, looked down at his hands, a deep frown creasing his brow. But Prosecutor Henderson, ever the opportunist, leaped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant and highly prejudicial. A sob story doesn't change the facts. Theft is theft," he boomed, his face flushed. "It's a crime, plain and simple. What kind of message are we sending to society if we excuse such blatant lawlessness, regardless of the alleged motive?" He glared at Martha, then at Claire, his expression one of righteous indignation. The fragile empathy that had begun to bloom in the courtroom withered slightly under his aggressive legal assault. Part 3, A Defense of Dignity and the Courtroom Shaken. Claire Anderson didn't flinch under Henderson's attack. Instead, a fire ignited in her eyes. She turned slowly to face him, her earlier composure now charged with a palpable fury. "You want to talk about messages, Mr. Henderson?" she challenged, her voice, though not raised, cut through the courtroom like a scalpel. "By all means, let's talk about messages. What message did we, as a society, send to Sergeant Martha Evans when she came home from a war, physically broken from saving American lives, only to find a system that was indifferent to her sacrifice and her pain?" Her gaze swept across the courtroom, daring anyone to look away. What message was sent when her repeated pleas for adequate medical care for her service-connected injuries were buried in bureaucracy and red tape at the VA? What message was sent when the cost of life-saving medication for her sister, her only family, was priced so astronomically high that it became a luxury she couldn't afford on a hero's pension? Claire took a deliberate step towards the prosecutor. "You speak of lawlessness. But what of the moral lawlessness that allows a decorated veteran to be pushed to such a desperate edge? When Martha Evans was under fire in Iraq, risking her life to pull wounded soldiers from a burning Humvee, do you think she was weighing the message her bravery would send? No. She was thinking of her duty, her comrades, her humanity. She acted out of a profound sense of responsibility. And when her sister lay dying, she acted out of that same profound sense of love and responsibility, the only way she felt she could. The jurors leaned forward, captivated. Then, Claire did something no one in that courtroom, least of all Martha Evans, expected. She walked over to the defendant's box, her expression softening as she looked at the bewildered old soldier. "Martha," she said gently, her voice now a soothing balm amidst the courtroom's harshness. She reached out and lightly touched Martha's trembling arm. "Can you show us? Can you show the court how you did it? How you saved those men in Iraq?" Martha looked up, her eyes wide with confusion and a touch of fear. Show them," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Claire affirmed, her gaze unwavering and encouraging. "Show them what a hero does." Slowly, hesitantly, guided by Claire's gentle prompting, Martha Evans, the accused thief, began to move. She winced as she put pressure on her bad leg, but a flicker of something long dormant sparked in her eyes. She leaned forward, her body instinctively contorting into a low crouch, one hand reaching out as if to check a pulse, the other moving as if to apply a pressure bandage. It was a pantomime, a memory dredged from the depths of trauma and duty, yet it was utterly compelling. In that cramped defendant's box, under the sterile courtroom lights, Martha Evans was no longer a broken old woman. For a fleeting moment, she was Sergeant Evans, combat medic, in the dusty, blood-soaked sands of Iraq, fighting to keep her comrades alive. Claire turned back to the stunned courtroom. "This," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction, "this is the position Sergeant Evans took as bullets whizzed past her head, as explosions rocked the ground beneath her. For this, for her extraordinary heroism that day, she was awarded the Bronze Star with a V for Valor. Today, you see her brought low, accused of a crime born of desperation. But I ask you, who truly stands in judgment here?" Gasps rippled through the public gallery. One elderly woman openly wept. A male juror, a man who looked like he might have seen service himself, took off his glasses and wiped his eyes, staring at Martha with an expression of profound respect. Judge Harrison was visibly moved, his usual gruff demeanor softened by an undeniable wave of emotion. Prosecutor Henderson stood dumbfounded, his face a mask of disbelief, his carefully constructed case crumbling before his eyes. And then, just as the weight of Claire's words settled upon the room, a frail but clear voice called out from the back of the courtroom. "Martha. Sister." Every head swiveled towards the sound. Standing near the courtroom entrance, supported by a concerned-looking younger woman who was likely a friend or neighbor, was Susan Evans. She was pale, her hands clutching a worn, hand-knitted shawl around her thin shoulders, perhaps the same shawl Martha had kept her warm with during countless cold nights. Despite her obvious frailty, there was an undeniable determination in her eyes. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, her gaze fixed on her sister. "Martha," she called again, her voice a little stronger this time. She gently shrugged off the supporting arm of her companion and began to make her way, slowly but resolutely, down the center aisle towards the front of the courtroom, towards her sister. No one moved. No one breathed. The clatter of a dropped pen echoed like a gunshot in the sudden, absolute silence. Part 4, Conscience Stirred and the Radiance of Humanity. Susan reached the defendant's box. Martha, tears now openly streaming down her weathered cheeks, reached out a trembling hand. The sisters grasped each other, a silent, desperate embrace that spoke volumes of shared hardship, unwavering love, and a bond forged in a lifetime of mutual support. They clung to each other, two frail women against a world that had shown them little kindness, yet their shared strength was palpable. Then, something extraordinary happened. In the jury box, the woman who had been dabbing her eyes slowly rose to her feet. Then, the ex-serviceman juror stood. One by one, with a solemnity usually reserved for a flag or a fallen hero, every member of the jury rose. Their faces were no longer masks of indifference or judgment, but mirrors reflecting respect, compassion, and a dawning understanding. Judge Harrison, a man known for his stern adherence to judicial protocol, watched this unfold, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he too, slowly, deliberately, pushed back his chair and stood. The entire courtroom, save for the still-seated, ashen-faced prosecutor Henderson, was now standing. A silent, powerful tribute to Martha Evans, not as a defendant, but as a woman, a sister, a soldier. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft sounds of the sister's quiet sobs. After what felt like an eternity, Judge Harrison cleared his throat, his voice raspy with emotion. He looked directly at the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "given the extraordinary circumstances presented today, and the clear, compelling testimony regarding Ms. Evans' character and the duress under which she acted." He paused, then looked towards Martha and Susan. "This court finds itself in a unique position." He didn't need to instruct the jury to deliberate. Their collective stance was a verdict in itself. After consultation, he continued, though no visible consultation had occurred, and in consideration of the overwhelming mitigating factors, this court, exercising its discretion in the profound interest of justice and compassion, hereby dismisses all charges against Ms. Martha Evans. He banged his gavel once, softly. Case dismissed. A wave of relief, so potent it was almost visible, washed over Martha and Susan. Claire Anderson placed a supportive hand on Martha's shoulder, a rare, genuine smile gracing her lips. As they slowly made their way out of the courtroom, arm in arm, Susan leaning heavily on Martha, a local newspaper reporter, a young man who had been furiously scribbling notes throughout the proceedings, turned to his colleague. "That lawyer," he whispered, awestruck, "she didn't just win a case for a forgotten veteran. She reminded an entire courtroom what true honor and decency look like." The dismissal of Martha Evans' case didn't just end her personal ordeal, it rippled outwards. The local news picked up the story, initially focusing on the dramatic courtroom scene, but soon delving deeper into the systemic issues Claire Anderson had so fiercely highlighted, the often inadequate support for aging and disabled veterans, especially women, and the crippling cost of essential medications. Community groups, spurred by the public outpouring of sympathy for Martha and Susan, organized fundraisers. An anonymous donor paid for a year's supply of Susan's specialist insulin. A veteran support organization stepped in to help Martha navigate the VA bureaucracy, finally securing her the full benefits she was entitled to but had been denied for years. Martha Evans' quiet courage, her desperate act born of love, and Claire Anderson's passionate defense had, in a small but significant way, shone a light into some dark corners. It reminded people that behind every statistic, every case file, there was a human story, often one of sacrifice and struggle. It showed that honor wasn't just something displayed on a battlefield decades ago, it was lived every day, in the quiet acts of caring for a loved one, in the refusal to be broken by hardship, and in the willingness of some to fight for those the world had forgotten. The courtroom had been stunned, but perhaps, it had also been awakened. True strength isn't found in the power to judge or condemn, but in the capacity for understanding, empathy, and compassion. Even when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds, the unwavering light of human decency and a commitment to what is right can illuminate the darkest paths, reminding us that justice, in its truest form, must always be tempered with mercy. The echoes of that courtroom served as a potent reminder. Did this story touch your heart? Please comment respect to honor all veterans, especially women who have served, and share your thoughts. Subscribe, like, and share this story of justice and compassion.